Have you ever had a fight that feels like a boring dice log? The secret to making combat exciting isn't necessarily more enemies, it can be the battlefield itself. Today, we're going to break down the use of difficult terrain to both add tension, strategy, and actually drama to combats. We're going to cover the best types of difficult terrain, how to use them tactically, and tips for balancing both challenge and fun with something as simple as the landscape. First things first, what is difficult terrain? So, in Dungeons & Dragons, difficult terrain simply means for every foot of movement costs twice as much to go. A player with 30-foot movement can only move 15 feet through difficult terrain. The common examples are, mud, you've got rubble, underbrush, deep water. A quick tip and a rule, difficult terrain stacks with other effects like slow, exhaustion, making movement a true challenge during combat. But that's the fundamentals of what difficult terrain is. How do we use it though? On the surface, difficult terrain doesn't necessarily make it look like combat could be better. For players, it can actually force creative tactics. You can put yourself to make the enemies go through difficult terrain as used. You can use spells like Misty Step or abilities like Fly to avoid that difficult terrain, you having to think creatively. For Dungeon Masters, it adds layers of tension. Players must decide whether to fight, flee, run, reposition themselves, and there's also a psychological edge to this. Difficult terrain actually makes the battlefield matter, turning movement into a choice. Not necessarily a chore, but a very detailed choice. Now, what are the types of difficult terrain and how do we use them? The natural terrain that's easy to add effectively is thick forests. They provide cover but reduce visibility. The tactical tip is that archers can use trees for cover while melee fighters struggle to advance. Swamps or mud that slows everyone down except creatures native to it, like lizard folk. So there's always a way around difficult terrain, and it allows rangers to even shine, especially if they can move through that difficult terrain. Hide hazards like sinking quicksand in it just for fun, and to be an a-hole, because sometimes that's fun too. You also have environmental hazards, and this adds a little danger and fun. A little bit more than just difficult terrain. There's ice sheets. Players risk falling prone when they dash. The idea is that if they move more than 10 feet, they have to roll a dex save or slip and fall. Flooding chamber rises each round, shrinking the battlefield, making more of the area flooded, especially if it's hilled. Then you have magical terrain, perfect for fantasy settings because we're playing TTRPGs. Arcane crystal fields, stepping near crystals cause wild magic surges, but the crystals are so sharp that it's tough to move through, causing difficult terrain. You have haunted ground, spectral hands grasping at your ankles, reducing your movement unless a wisdom save is rolled successfully. There's lots of ways to create difficult terrain that's not just swamps and muds and forests. There's lots of things that you can do with that. You can also use difficult terrain tactically. You can force positioning choices. Places with powerful enemies behind a field of difficult terrain, players may decide to waste movement or use ranged attacks standing back. They can create movement bubbles, split the party or over broken bridges, forcing them to coordinate how to regroup through these difficult terrains. Combining that difficult terrain with traps, falling rocks onto the battlefield, rubble mid-fight, explosions going off, magical wards. Now that's some difficult terrain, especially in the fantasy setting. But players can use difficult terrain too. Spells like Grease, Entangle, these can actually create that difficult terrain, including spike growth. And you can even use your abilities creatively. Rogues with dash and climb can bypass difficult zones by going around it. Fighters can shove enemies into hazards. Difficult terrain is not just about hindering the party, but about giving the party something to interact with. You can use caltrops, ball bearings to control choke points. It's in the player's adventures, player's handbooks. If the players choose to have them, Dungeon Masters give them a chance to use that to create that difficult terrain, creating those choke points. This is something that makes it players' choices affecting the enemy's difficult terrain and then allow the enemies to crash into it. There's nothing more satisfying than doing that. Now, difficult terrain for the Dungeon Masters. You're challenging the players without overwhelming them. This is a use of terrain to reward problem solving, not just punishing them, right? You're giving them a challenge, but allowing them to overcome that through creative thinking. Add safe zones like pillars or ledges, other types of movement impairing objects that they can get around the difficult terrain by using it allowing them for strategic movement. Just don't put difficult terrain and be like, hey, look, it's hard to move there. Layering the difficulty also makes a difference. Combine low visibility with difficult terrain for maximum tension. Not only can you move slow, you can't see very far either. Also allow the terrain to evolve. Change the battlefield over time. Lava rises, ice breaks, floors collapse, mud flows move. All of those things can cause the terrain and the battlefield to be just as organic and, well, feel just as good. Now, there are some common mistakes that people and dungeon masters, including myself, make when doing difficult terrain, or using difficult terrain, I should say. Number one is overusing it. Slowing down every fight kills the pacing. It should be used for key encounters, or to make specific parts of a battlefield more tactical, or to hide a specific enemy. But if everything is difficult terrain all the time and the characters can only move 15 foot, it becomes a little overwhelming. So keep that in mind. Also, don't forget visibility. Difficult terrain can also be accompanied by fog, darkness, large boulders hiding behind people, walls. There's all sorts of things that difficult terrain should be compared with, or paired with, I should say, not compared to. But yeah, utilizing difficult terrain with other factors makes it more engaging, and less like you just slapped some rubble down on the floor. Also, one of the things that DMs forget to do is reward creativity. You always need to reward the players to think outside the box. Don't allow the players to just go whimsical through it and feel like, oh god, I wish we were trying to be creative, but the Dungeon Master wouldn't let us do anything. If you're going to throw difficult terrain and visibility, allow some of the solutions the players have be able to overcome those things. It'll change your game. It'll change your dynamics. Now, for the final tips and recap on difficult terrain, mix up your terrain types. Change the battlefield mid-fight and reward clever movement. Difficult terrain just slapped down by itself is boring. However, when it's combined with clever choices and allowing the players to take advantage of the difficult terrain as well, that's where it feels good for the players, and it feels good for you as the Dungeon Master to watch your players take advantage of it. And as players, use spells and tactics that control the battlefield. Turn the terrain to your advantage. It's not just a damage slog, and if the DM is putting you up against some major hitters, control the battlefield. You can control it just as much as the Dungeon Master can. You just got to think creatively, and hopefully your Dungeon Master rewards you for that. And also, what's the most memorable combat encounter you've had where terrain was part of it? As players, what did you do, or what encounter did you have that the difficult terrain just made it everything that it was? And Dungeon Masters, where have you used it in the past? I would love to hear you guys on how terrain made a difference in your campaigns and adventures and encounters. And finally, guys, make sure that you like, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell for more D&D tips every single Wednesday. This will be an ongoing thing. And, as always, we will see you when? We will see you next time.